I'd like to tell you about a very special book. This book has changed the world. You might have heard of it. It's called the Bible.
You know, it's not just a single book. The word Bible comes from the Greek, ta biblia, which means books. So the Bible isn't just a book. It's actually a divine library.
Ooh, let's take a look inside.
The first 5 books are known as the books of Moses, the Pentateuch, or the Law.
Then we have the historical books, along with Genesis and Exodus. These form the core story of the Old Testament.
Next are the poetry books, and then the writings of the prophets.
The Christian Bible also includes the New Testament.
The 4 Gospels tell the story of Jesus, and Acts tells about the disciples spreading the good news.
The rest are the letters of Paul, organized longest to shortest, except Hebrews. And then letters from other church leaders.
So let's get to the good stuff inside. The Bible begins with God saying, "Let there be light," and then tells about the creation of the world.
Next, we learn about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Where are their clothes?
Clothes weren't invented yet. But then they were, and then they left the garden and began their life in the mortal world.
Some of their kids were wicked, like Cain, who murdered his brother Abel. And some were righteous, like Seth, whose descendant, Enoch, was so righteous that his city was taken unto heaven.
Noah and his family survived the flood. God confounded the languages at the Tower of Babel. And finally, we are introduced to Abram. The Lord makes a covenant with Abram that he will make of him a great nation. His name was changed to Abraham, and he had 2 sons.
Both the oldest, Ishmael, and the youngest, Isaac, would go on to father 12 sons. For Isaac, they would be his grandsons. These sons would become great nations, because Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. And who did he beget? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin.
Impressive! You're proud of yourself, aren't you?
Yep.
The Bible is the story of Isaac's descendants. Isaac's son Jacob had his name changed to Israel. His son Joseph was feared by his father, but hated by his brothers. So, they faked his death, but secretly sold him as a slave in Egypt.
Joseph faced many challenges, but remained faithful to God. In time, he was made the greatest man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He made peace with his brothers and brought the whole family to Egypt. There, their descendants stayed for more than 400 years.
Eventually, a Pharaoh feared the strength and questioned the loyalty of the Hebrews and made them slaves. In time, God raised up Moses to lead them to freedom. After 40 years in the wilderness, they were ready for the promised land.
Finally, led now by Joshua, the Hebrews crossed the river Jordan and began to conquer the land of Canaan, starting with Jericho.
In those days, and for about the next 450 years, Israel was led by judges, men and women called by God to help their people.
But eventually, the people wanted kings, like all the other nations. God led the prophet Samuel to ordain Saul the first king of Israel. David fought Goliath and was the next king, and Solomon was the last that would rule a unified kingdom.
The 10 tribes of Israel in the north made Samaria their capital, and chose Jeroboam to be their king. And Judah stayed in the south, keeping Jerusalem as their capital.
For hundreds of years, the two kingdoms struggled against foreign enemies and each other. God continued to call prophets in both nations. Eventually, an enemy, the likes of which had not been seen before, swept all nations before it. Assyria dominated the land and conquered all of Israel. Assyria even conquered all of Judah except Jerusalem. A miracle of God in the days of King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah protected that city, and the Assyrians never captured it.
100 years later, the Babylonians had now replaced the Assyrians as the big bully on the block. This time, the people of Judah rejected the prophets of God, and Jerusalem was crushed by the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar.
He took the best and brightest young people to live and serve in Babylon.
You mean like me?
Actually, I was thinking of people like Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego.
The Babylonians were replaced by the Persians, whose king Cyrus allowed Nehemiah to take a group back to rebuild Jerusalem and her temple.
Esther, the Jewish maiden, married the Persian king Ahasuerus, and more groups returned to Jerusalem and the land of Judah. These included prophets like Ezra and Malachi. The Greeks replaced the Persians, and finally, Rome ruled the land.
It was in those days that Jesus was born, announcing the beginning of the New Testament. The four Gospels tell the story of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, and Acts follows the works and the testimonies of his disciples. The rest of the New Testament contains letters written by Paul and other leaders of the church.
And that's the Bible, an amazing collection of books.
We've just scratched the surface. To find out more, open this divine library and dive in.